While I called the last section Prelude to the Hobbit, this section can be called Prelude to the Lord of the Rings, which begins with the events of the Hobbit itself. We learned how Gandalf was concerned about Dol Guldur, especially when he found out that the necromancer was actually Sauron. I assume necromancer was a reference to the character Thu from Tolkien's very early writings, which the professor later in his writing phases evolved into a new evil character that would become Sauron. In this context we can read, the dragon Sauron might use with terrible effect. So the dragon problem had to be solved, and with Gandalf meeting Thorin and Bilbo, he envisioned a quest to Erebor that had the potential to counter Sauron here. To quote Gandalf, "Suddenly in my mind these three things came together, the great dragon with his lust and his keen hearing and scent, the sturdy heavy-booted dwarves with their old burning grudge, and the quick soft-footed hobbit, sick at heart, I guessed, for a sight of the wide world." Galadriel was right when she said needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life, especially in this time when Sauron was slowly setting things into motion that would lead to the War of the Ring later. Sauron was, like Gandalf, Saruman and Radagast, an Ainu, one of the Maiar, something like an angel of lower rank, just one that worked against the good forces of Eru, that is God. As such, Sauron was a powerful evil spirit entity that could also take a physical form, which was in this time though less important. Besides calling this section Prelude to the Lord of the Rings, I could also call it Rise of the Shadow, which will lead from the Hobbit to the beginning of the Lord of the Rings. This we will discuss today and get close to the end of this long video journey through the lore from Elrond's perspective. My name is Chris, aka ThePhilosophersGames, and before we start, a few hints. This video is still part of my Who is Elrond video series, but it is also perfectly understandable if you have not seen the other 10 parts yet. I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, which means there will be trilled R's. Shoutouts to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks like Kimberly80, Sara Morello, Ted Naismith, Jenny Dolphin, and all the others. Thank you. And spoiler warning. I assume Gandalf felt, due to his foresight, that Bilbo had a greater role to play and that he needed to counter Sauron's rise and potential alliance with Smaug. He orchestrated a meeting of Thorin Oakenshield and his companions at Bilbo's home, Bag End, in April 3rd Age 2941. In Tolkien's nomenclature for the translators of The Lord of the Rings, the professor explained that Bag End was the name of his aunt's farm because it was at the end of a lane leading to it and no further. I think you call a road like this dead-end road, nose-through road, or cul-de-sac in English. The German word for it is Sackgasse, which literally means something like back alley or pouch alley. Though back can also be translated with Beutel, which is the word used in the German translation. Cul-de-sac also means bottom of a sack or bag. However, what is interesting here is that Gandalf was quite hasty. According to the chapter The Quest of Erebor in Unfinished Tales, Gandalf met Thorin around the 15th of March of the same year. The wizard then visited the Shire in April, a day before the Elvish New Year called Yestare, which is around the 6th of April. There he talked to a hobbit named Holman Greenhand, the gardener of Bag End, Sam's father Gaffer was his apprentice, about Bilbo and realized that Bilbo was the hobbit he needed for the quest without actually talking to him at all because he was not home. Bilbo was out to see the elves passing the Shire due to the Yestare, the Elvish New Year, which in my opinion reflects a bit Sam and Frodo wanting to see the elves in Lord of the Rings. Then Gandalf went back to the dwarves and had to convince Thorin to choose a secretive approach for the quest and taking this hobbit burglar with him, which Gandalf explained was the most difficult part. And shortly after, Thorin and company left the Shire at the end of April already. If we look at the events before, where it took literally centuries to take action, the pacing here suddenly accelerated immensely. In August was the next White Council, and Gandalf had to attend to convince the council of attacking Dol Guldur. Must have been a stressful year for Gandalf. In the Quest of Erebor chapter in Unfinished Tales, we find an interesting remark by Thorin against Bilbo joining the company. He is soft, he snorted, soft as the mud of his shire, and silly. His mother died too soon. The comment on the early death of Bilbo's mother, Belladonna, I found interesting. She was 82 when she died, Bilbo's father was 80. Looking into the lifespan of hobbits, it seems that it was not unusual that a hobbit lived around 100 years. Belladonna's father, Old Took, even lived for 130 years and was the oldest known hobbit until Bilbo. I assume what Thorin meant with this remark was that it was a bad omen or bad genes. While discussing this passage in a stream, Chat also hinted at that Tolkien's own parents died early as well, which can be seen as a parallel. Shoutouts to Rosemary. The Quest of Erebor chapter is a fascinating read with many additional information, so I recommend checking it out. What at the end convinced Thorin was Gandalf expressing that he was fond of Bilbo and wished him well and, quote, treat him well and you shall have my friendship to the end of your days. Tolkien further writes, dwarves understand devotion to friends and gratitude to those who help them, which was what ultimately convinced Thorin, besides the map and key, under the condition that Gandalf also joins the company as long as Bilbo proved his worth. In this dialogue, Gandalf also expressed multiple times that he had the foresight that this quest would fail without Bilbo and that he also had greater things in mind with this. In the context of Bilbo seeing elves passing the Shire, we know from the book The Road Goes Ever On that elves at times went to the west coast, to the Tower Hills, the Emun Bereid, to look at the Elostirion stone, a palantir, which can see to the west continent Aman. For the elves, this is some kind of pilgrimage, and this was also the reason why Frodo and Sam and Pippin will later meet Gildor, who returned from this pilgrimage to Rivendell and helped Frodo and his friends. So one could interpret a connection of some elves that Bilbo might have seen here to Rivendell as well, though it is not recorded that Bilbo's little journey was successful and what exactly happened during it. Also, Bilbo was 51 at that time, a very similar age compared to when Frodo left the Shire. After the dwarves and Gandalf visited Bilbo in Backend, they also waited for him at the Green Dragon Inn in Bywater the next day, which also appears again in The Lord of the Rings. So as you can see, there are many parallels between the two books. Of course, in the book, Gandalf has to get Bilbo from Backend so that he is in time to accompany the dwarves on their quest for Erebor. From here, the events of The Hobbit begin. Thorin and company left the Shire and went east towards the Misty Mountains with the plan to cross them and from there go further east to the Lonely Mountain, Erebor. The first important event during this journey was meeting the three trolls, William, Tom and Bert, in the Trollshaws. We talked in an earlier section about the Dúnedain kingdom of Arnor and it splitting into three smaller kingdoms, Third Age, 861. One of those was called Hrúdaur, and interestingly, Tolkien translates this name with Trollshaw, according to Parma el Delamberon, issue 17, page 115, where his notes about words and their etymology are published. We speculated earlier about that in the time of the War of Angmar, orcs and trolls might have fled through there to the Ettenmoors and into the adjacent mountains. Throughout history, it seems that the Ettenmoors, which are also called Trollfells, were a region where trolls lived. The name at least suggests this. Rivendell, so Elrond and the region around, do of course not wish that people get waylaid by trolls or orcs so close to their borders, and also potentially try to protect the region, but time and time again, trolls and orcs troubled the surrounding regions. In the Hobbit book, Gandalf scouted a bit ahead and met people from Rivendell who feared the trolls in the shores and assumed that the creatures moved there from the mountains. I assume they got there through the Ettenmoors, where fans speculate that Mount Gram lies. As earlier discussed, the Shire was once attacked by orcs from there. A possible reason why Rivendell and their allies had trouble defending against the presence of trolls and orcs in this northern region might be that it was difficult to pass. Gandalf explained in the chapter The Council of Elrond in Lord of the Rings that, quote, "For I could not ride among the rocks of the Trollfells, the Ettenmoors, and Shadowfax departed. I sent him back to his master." So not even Gandalf on Shadowfax could pass that terrain easily. As a result, I assume Elrond's elves would also not push further, and so evil could always cause trouble there. As mentioned earlier, Aragorn's grandfather Arador, who lived in the Trollshaws according to a text in Nature of Middle-earth, was taken by hill trolls and slain in the north, in the cold fells, which I assume were also around the Ettenmoors. I think at the late Third Age, with Sauron's power being on the rise again, the trolls grew more desperate and aggressive. Overall, the region was troubled by orcs and trolls for thousands of years. There's a reason why it was called Trollshaws, and also Mount Gundabad, a very important place for the dwarves, was controlled by orcs and trolls for a long time. Quote from Nature of Middle-earth: "They had become more bold, and their scattered tribes had become leagued together and had dug a deep stronghold beneath Mount Gundabad. Slowly they were creeping southward." Even though after the war of dwarves and orcs, Gundabad was freed of orcs, and I would include trolls, this must have changed again at some point. We know from the Hobbit that the orcs fighting in the Battle of Five Armies came from Gundabad again. Quote, "Then they marched and gathered by hill and valley, going ever by tunnel or underdark until around and beneath the great mountain Gundabad of the north, where was their capital. A vast host was assembled, ready to sweep down." I assume the dwarves really freed Gundabad, but had not the strength to keep it under their control after the devastating war of the dwarves and orcs. We know dwarves only increased in number very slowly, which was different for orcs. However, in The Hobbit, Thorin and company met the trolls, and with Gandalf confusing them with imitating their voices, they lost track of the time and were turned to stone by the first sunlight of the day. After that, the company entered the troll cave with the key Bilbo found and buried the valuable treasures of the troll hoard outside, even putting spells on them, and took some items also with them, like the short sword that will be later known as Sting, Orcrist and Glamdring. From here they continued their journey to Rivendell, the last homely house where they met Elrond. The company rested in Rivendell for 2 weeks, and Elrond was able to identify the two swords from the troll hoard as Glamdring, the sword of Turgon, king of Gondolin and great-grandfather of Elrond, and Orcrist, another famous sword of Gondolin. Some speculate it was the sword of Ecthelion, one of the elf lords of the king, so both from the hidden elven city Gondolin. How these swords went into possession of the trolls is not known. Elrond speculates, quote, "They must have come from a dragon's hoard or goblin plunder, for dragons and goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. But one may guess that your trolls had plundered other plunderers, or come on the remnants of old robberies in some hold in the mountains." As we learned at the beginning, Gondolin was attacked by Morgoth and completely destroyed. Only few managed to escape, like Elrond's grandparents, Idril and Tuor. It's interesting that these two swords survived because Beleriand, the land on which Gondolin once stood, was sunk into the ocean, but we know that many orcs, and I assume trolls, fled east over the Blue Mountains to escape their destruction. Quote from Peoples of Middle-earth. But when Morgoth fell and Angband was destroyed, hosts of the orcs fled eastwards seeking homes. So through orcs and other creatures fleeing and maybe taking some valuable treasures with them, the swords might have survived the fall of Beleriand. Further, by chance or purpose, Elrond could also find and read the Moonrunes on Thorin's map, holding it against the moonlight. For that, they must have been originally written during a moon of the same shape and season with the silver pens of the dwarves. This indicates that Elrond had some knowledge of the dwarves and must have had contact with them in the past, because dwarves are very secretive when it comes to their culture. This is not further explained in any texts of Tolkien I'm aware of. Tolkien only explains Elrond knew all about runes of every kind. Interestingly, Elrond asks what Durin's Day is, I assume for exposition reasons, but he knows about their secret moon runes. Of course, the dwarven writing system was in its origin Elvish, so it makes sense that Elrond knew it, and Celebrimbor and his Jewelsmiths Guild, who Elrond must have known, had the Isildur, which might be related. So there are possible explanations without Elrond knowing the culture of the dwarves that well. Also, from this scene is the quote from the beginning of this project. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the North for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. Elrond, of course, also shared what he could read on the map with the dwarves and returned the map to them without hesitation. In addition, he allowed the company, consisting of 15 people, rest in Rivendell for over 14 days. He, for sure, was kind as summer. Rivendell in Tolkien stories was always a place where people meet and get rest, information and advice. Elrond was an important figure to grant all those things, and with the help of his Ring of Power Vilya, he could protect his realm, similar to Galadriel, quote, "Evil things did not come into that valley." From here the company continued their journey, and Thorin promised to honor his new sword. Thorin pondered these words. "I will keep this sword in honor," he said. "May it soon cleave goblin once again." Elrond answered, "A wish that is likely to be granted soon enough in the mountains." Elrond should be right, but he probably did not foresaw that in the mountains one of the most important events of the Third Age would happen: Bilbo finding the One Ring. On their way through the Misty Mountains, they were surprised by orcs in their sleep in a cave that Fili and Kili did not explore as thoroughly as they claimed. In The Hobbit, Tolkien mostly used, with few exceptions, the word goblins for orcs. Later, he would mainly use the word orc, as he explained or hinted at in letter 144, 151, and 131. Only Gandalf could escape, who saved them later, and the dwarves and Bilbo were brought in front of the great goblin in Goblin Town. Interestingly, the goblins recognized Orcrist and Glamdring. The meta explanation for this might be that Tolkien simply borrowed names and ideas from his early Silmarillion writings for the Hobbit story, which might have taken place for some time in Tolkien's mind during the time of his Silmarillion stories in the late First Age. However, on their way out, Bilbo fell into the abyss and was lost for some time. It was here where Bilbo finds the One Ring and is later confronted by Gollum. We all know the story in and out. Originally in the first edition of The Hobbit from 1937, the ring was just a magic ring that made its wearer invisible, and Gollum offered it as a reward for winning the riddles game, not knowing Bilbo had already found it. When Gollum can't find it, he shows Bilbo the way out instead. Tolkien changed this chapter quite a bit when he worked on The Lord of the Rings, and the magic ring became the One Ring. The changes were published 1951 in the second edition of The Hobbit. Tolkien, however, still referenced the first edition in Lord of the Rings. It is how Bilbo tells the story to not look like a thief, because with this he can claim that he won the ring fair and square. A very neat idea by Tolkien. Bilbo getting the ring changed everything. The One Ring was in Gollum's possession for about 478 years, poisoning his mind and completely destroying his life. It did not help that he started his possession of the One Ring with murder, which will be different for Bilbo. For the world, though, it was not bad that he found the ring, because due to this it was lost for such a long time and could not return to Sauron. Gandalf would also argue that it was Bilbo's fate to find the ring and meet Gollum. We can read Bilbo's thoughts in The Hobbit, though this quote was added for the second edition and shows also a bit how the ring tried to work on Bilbo's mind, which was not needed in the original release. He must fight, he must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No. Not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him or tried to yet. And he was miserable, alone, lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless, unmarked days without light or hope of betterment. Hard stone, cold fish sneaking and whispering. Gandalf would later comment on this to Frodo as well. It was pity that stayed his hand, pity and mercy not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership to the ring so, with pity. So in the end, the invisible Bilbo leaped over Gollum and spared his life. After that, Thorin and company reunited and continued their journey. They escaped the orcs thanks to the eagles, met Beorn, had to cross Mirkwood and were imprisoned by the Elven King Thranduil. But before entering Mirkwood, Gandalf had to leave the company. It is not explained in The Hobbit where Gandalf went, but Tolkien wrote an explanation for it later in Lord of the Rings. He went west from Mirkwood and rode to another meeting of the White Council. Elrond was of course a member and Rivendell lies west of Mirkwood. We don't know exactly where the council took place, but due to Gandalf going west and not south, if he would travel immediately to the council, it would only be Rivendell or Mithlond, and Rivendell makes more sense to it being more central. In this meeting, the Lore of the Rings was much debated. There was for sure doubt in the council, including the last meeting, that the One Ring was washed into the sea. For example, Elrond foresaw during the last meeting, 3rd Age 2851, according to the Silmarillion, "Nonetheless, I forebode that the one will yet be found, and then war will arise again, and in that war this age will be ended. Indeed, in a second darkness it will end, unless some strange chance deliver us that my eyes cannot see." Now, in this meeting, 90 years later, Gandalf found a new argument. It is not needed that the ring should be found, for while it abides on earth and is not unmade, still the power that it holds will live, and Sauron will grow and have hope. The might of the elves and the elf friends is less now than of old. Soon he will be too strong for you, even without the great ring. For he rules the 9, and of the 7 he has recovered 3. We must strike. Gandalf already said during the last meeting that help might come from the hands of the weak when the wise falter. This time Saruman, the leader of the White Council, agreed to the attack because he noticed the activities of Sauron's servants around the Gladden Fields, where he also would search for the One Ring. If they forced Sauron to leave the area, he could continue his search there undisturbed. With this, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He could avoid that the other council members get too suspicious of his plans and remove Sauron from the Gladden Fields, not knowing that the ring was already gone for 478 years. Saruman at this time was already a traitor. He did not see an enemy in Sauron, but a rival. The other members were unaware of this. Since the last meeting, 3rd Age 2851, he also convinced Radagast to lend him some of his birds that Saruman used to gather information and spy for him. Radagast thought that with this he helped their cause against Sauron because he was also not aware of Saruman's treachery. We don't know how long the council needed to prepare the attack, but we know it happened in the same year. In the Silmarillion text it reads like the council drove Sauron out of Dol Guldur. In Appendix B, more like Sauron had already packed his bags and left when the council arrived. Compare, therefore, for the last time he aided the council, and they put forth their strength, and they assailed Dol Guldur, and drove Sauron from his hold, with Sauron having made his plans abandons Dol Guldur. In my mind, Sauron expected to be confronted one day, and when the White Council showed up, he just left Dol Guldur behind without much resistance. The council also had quite powerful members with Elrond, Galadriel, Círdan, and 2 Maiar with Saruman and Gandalf. Further, they also had the 3 Great Rings of Power. Interestingly, it seems Sauron had a physical form for quite some time, according to this quote from the Silmarillion. This is not one of the Ulairi ring race, as many have long supposed. It is Sauron himself who has taken shape again and now grows apace, and he is gathering again all the rings to his hand, and he seeks ever for news of the One and of the heirs of Isildur, if they live still on earth. This quote is from the time when Gandalf first discovers Sauron in Dol Guldur and reports back to the White Council, 3rd Age 2851. So did Sauron have to leave Dol Guldur physically? That might explain why Tolkien wrote in Appendix B, Sauron having made his plans abandons Dol Guldur. It must also be noted that Gandalf was completely right here. Pushing Sauron into making moves early was very important for ultimately defeating the Dark Lord. If they had allowed him to further gather his strength, Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring would not have found places to hide and get aid from later, because Sauron would have conquered those. In this context, it was also very wise of Gandalf to prevent an alliance between Smaug and Sauron by helping Thorin. In the meantime, Thorin and company escaped the dungeons of the Elven King, visited Lake Town or Esgaros, and reached Erebor, which led to Smaug's death and to the Battle of 5 Armies, to which Gandalf also returned in time. We talked about Gundabad, and from The Hobbit we know that the orcs moved to Erebor from there. 3/4 of the orc warriors of the North were killed that day. Quote, "Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the North perished on that day, and the mountains had peace for many a year. Thorin, Fili, and Kili fell in battle, and Dain or Doin Ironfoot inherits the throne of the Longbeards. With this, Thror's ruling line comes to an end because Doin II Ironfoot, still a direct descendant from Durin the Deathless, is from the line of Thror's youngest brother Gror. I could imagine that this also reduced a bit of trouble for Rivendell around the Misty Mountains, and Elrond was most likely also involved in attacking Dol Guldur. Further, he helped the dwarves out, which they for sure kept in mind. In this regard, 3rd Age 2941 was a very successful year for Elrond and Gandalf. 3rd Age 2942, Bilbo returns to the Shire with the One Ring. In Appendix B we find the note that Sauron returns in secret to Mordor, which indicates that after he left Dol Guldur, he did not directly return to Mordor. 2 years later, Bard rebuilds Dale and becomes king, which also stabilizes the region in the northeast, especially without Smaug in the equation. Also, Gollum decided to leave the mountains and search for the thief of the ring. With this, a time began where the chess pieces got slowly into position for the end of the Third Age. 3rd Age 2948, Théoden was born. Interestingly, he was born in Gondor. We discussed this detail earlier in this project. Théoden's father left Rohan to live in Gondor with his wife's family due to dissensions between him and Théoden's grandfather. 3rd Age 2949, Gandalf and Balin visited Bilbo in the Shire. A year later, Finduilas, who will later marry Denethor II, is born in Dol Amroth. A year later, in 2951, Sauron felt powerful enough to start making some moves again. He declared himself openly and gathered power in Mordor. For this, he also began rebuilding Barad-dûr. In my opinion, this also had an influence on many evil creatures, so we can read in Appendix B that Gollum also turned towards Mordor. I assume to project some of his power closer to the Dark Lord's enemies, he sent 3 of the Nazgûl to reoccupy Dol Guldur for him. Third Age 2951, Estel turns 20 years old and Elrond has a very unusual gift for him that year, or 2952 a year later. We discuss this in a moment. He reveals Estel's true identity to him, that he is Aragorn II, son of Arathorn II, chieftain of the Dúnedain of the North and heir to Isildur and Elendil. Elrond gives him his heirlooms, the Ring of Barahir, and the hilt shards of the broken sword Narsil, which once belonged to Elendil. The scepter of Anúminas, so the scepter of the king of Arnor, Elrond withholds from him for now. In Appendix A we get some glimpses of this scene and dialogue. But when Estel was only 20 years of age, it chanced that he returned to Rivendell after great deeds in the company of the sons of Elrond. And Elrond looked at him and was pleased, for he saw that he was fair and noble, and was early come to manhood, though he would yet become greater in body and mind. That day, therefore, Elrond called him by his true name, and told him who he was and whose son, and he delivered to him the heirlooms of his house. Here is the Ring of Barahir, he said, the token of our kinship from afar, and here also are the shards of Narsil. With these you may yet do great deeds, for I foretell that the span of your life shall be greater than the measure of men, unless evil befalls you and you fail at the test. But the test will be hard and long. The scepter of Anúminas I withhold, for you have yet to earn it. It's interesting that Aragorn was already out in the world with Elrond's sons Eladan and Elrohir, doing great deeds. He was not hiding in Rivendell. I also like that Elrond introduces the Ring of Barahir in this way, the token of our kinship from afar. The ring once belonged to Finrod Felagund, and he gifted it to Barahir, the father of Beren, who was an ancestor of Aragorn but also of Elrond. Beren was Elrond's great-grandfather by his mother's side, and Aragorn is from the line of Elrond's twin brother who lived about 6,000 years ago. Strangely, in Appendix B, there is an unusual new line or new paragraph, for Elrond reveals to Estel his true name and ancestry in the year 2951 entry. This is unique in Appendix B. As a result, some Tolkien scholars believe that Tolkien wanted to add year 2952 here, which would also limit the reveal to January and February of 2952, because Aragorn already turned 21 at the 1st of March, and the text clearly states when Estel was only 20 years of age. In early manuscripts of Appendix B, this date can also be found. However, it is not in the published versions of Lord of the Rings. In the meantime, Arwen must have returned to Rivendell from living in her grandmother Galadriel's realm Lothlórien, maybe due to the last White Council that will happen Third Age 2953, of which Galadriel is a member. The next day after Aragorn learned who he truly was, at the hour of sunset, he saw Arwen in the forest of Imladris for the first time. It's very reminiscent of the meeting of Beren and Luthien. Aragorn even calls her Tinuviel, the name given to Luthien when Beren first saw her. We can read about Arwen, daughter of Elrond, in whom it was said that the likeness of Luthien had come on earth again. This section of Appendix A, called Here Follows a Part of the Tale of Aragorn and Arwen, is a fantastic read, so I recommend checking it out. Aragorn only talked about this fateful meeting with his mother Gilrain. Both understood that men and elves do not wed, besides a few exceptions from legends of old. In addition, Aragorn's line diminished, while Elrond's line did not. Elrond foresaw this and could read the hearts of others. One day he called Aragorn to his chamber and they talked about the matter. For Elrond, wedding his daughter to Aragorn would mean that Arwen had to refuse the life of the Eldar and will not return with him to the west continent Aman. She would have to accept the gift of men, which was death, as Elrond's brother once did. The elves are bound to the world and exist as long as the world exists. What happens to them after the inevitable end of the world to Ardar, nobody knows, except Eru, which is God. Men, though, are not bound to the world. When they die, their spirits leave the world and go to a place only Eru knows. In this context, it could mean that Elrond will never see his daughter again. Maybe not even when the world has ended, though it is impossible to say. Nobody knows what will happen to the spirits of elves and men when a new, fully healed world is created by Eru. The gift of men, though, makes it clear that there is a future for men beyond the currently marred world, which is different for the elves. One of Tolkien's most complex texts, the Athrabes Finrod a Anres, discusses this concept from the perspective of elves through Finrod and men through Andres, who loved Finrod's brother Aegnor. I think Aragorn understood what he asked of Elrond to some degree, comparing it again to the story of Beren and Luthien. Quote, "I see that I have turned my eyes to a treasure no less dear than the treasure of Thingol that Beren once desired. Such is my fate." Elrond answered, "But there will be no choice before Arwen, my beloved, unless you, Aragorn, Arathorn's son, come between us and bring one of us, you or me, to a bitter parting beyond the end of the world. You do not know yet what you desire of me." Without Aragorn, there could be no choice for Arwen to stay in Middle-earth. However, they understood that this matter is something that could not be settled now. Then Aragorn took leave lovingly of Elrond and his house and left Rivendell, laboring for 30 years against Sauron, becoming the absolute best human being possible, because he needs to be if he wants to defeat Sauron and become the king of Gondor and Arnor. Third Age 2953, as mentioned, the White Council met for the last time, and here Saruman tried to convince the council that he found out that the One Ring was flushed into the sea and was lost forever. He went back to Isengard, took it for his own, not caring about Gondor anymore, and fortified it. In the Silmarillion we can further read, and took counsel with none save himself. He also feared Gandalf and noticed his interest in the Shire, so he placed some agents in that area as well. Also, the ruling steward of Gondor, Turgon, died, and his son Ecthelion II, father of Denethor II, becomes the next ruling steward of Gondor. Interestingly, in the same year, also King Thorongil in Rohan died, and his son Thorongil, as mentioned, living in Gondor, becomes king of Rohan. So the rulers of Gondor and Rohan changed in the same year. Meanwhile, in Mordor, repairing or rebuilding Barad-dûr could have been completed in this year. It depends a bit how you interpret a line in the Silmarillion. Third Age 2954, the world could witness a new height of Sauron's power as Mount Doom bursts into flame again and the last inhabitants of Ecthelion leave that region, fleeing over the Anduin. This weakened Gondor further. In Dol Amroth, Prince Imrahil, the younger brother of Finduilas, was born. In that time, Sauron's foes had to counter his moves, and Third Age 2956, Gandalf did that by meeting one of his most powerful allies. In that year, Aragorn met Gandalf, and they become friends, and from whom he gained much wisdom. It's interesting that Gandalf has potentially not met him in Rivendell before, but Elrond kept Aragorn a secret to protect him, and he also was just 10 years old when Gandalf visited Rivendell with Thorin. I think the meta explanation is, of course, that the character Aragorn did not exist when Tolkien wrote The Hobbit. Then Aragorn traveled Middle-earth and Under the name Thorongil, meaning Eagle of the Star, he served Théoden's father Thorongil in Rohan, and also the ruling steward Ecthelion II, father of Denethor II, in Gondor, by land and by sea. He took this name to keep his identity secret. Appendix B gives us a time frame from 3rd Age 2957 to 2980. We know from Appendix A that Aragorn started in Rohan and then left to begin the service in Gondor under steward Ecthelion II. To my knowledge, it is not clear if Théoden recognized Aragorn in the book's story. He does in the films though. But Denethor II is very likely aware of who Thorongil was. Quote, "Many believe that Denethor, who was subtle in mind and looked further and deeper than other men of his day, had discovered who the stranger Thorongil in truth was, and suspected that he and Mithrandir designed to supplant him." In the case of Théoden, as far as I know, it's not explicitly mentioned, but we know for a fact that a young Théoden has met and talked to Thorongil. Quote from Aragorn answering to Éomer. "For I have been in this land before, more than once, and ridden with a host of the Rohirrim, though under other name and in other guise. You I have not seen before, for you are young, but I have spoken with Eomund, your father, and with Théoden, son of Thorongil. Never in former days would any high lord of this land have constrained a man to abandon such a quest as mine." In that time, while Aragorn made his great journeys as Thorongil, Gaffer Gamgee became the gardener of Bag-End, 3rd Age 2961, and Frodo Baggins was born 3rd Age 2968. 8 years later, 3rd Age 2976, Denethor II married Finduilas of Dol Amros. 3rd Age 2977, Bane, son of Bard, becomes king of Dale after King Bard's death. It seems Bard did not get that old, but we don't know his birth date. If he was around 40 during The Hobbit, he was around 76 years when he died. Denethor's and Finduilas' first son Boromir was born 3rd Age 2978 and their second son Faramir 3rd Age 2983. We skip the year 2984 now. A year later, 2984, the ruling steward Ecthelion II died and Denethor II succeeded him. Tragically, Finduilas died very young at the age of 38 in 3rd Age 2988. In Appendix A, we only find some vague hints why she died so young. But it seemed to men that she, Finduilas, withered in the guarded city as a flower of the seaward vales set upon a barren rock. The shadow in the east filled her with horror, and she turned her eyes ever south to the sea that she missed. This tragic loss had a huge impact on Denethor II. After her death, Denethor became more grim and silent than before, and would sit long alone in his tower, deep in thought, foreseeing that the assault of Mordor would come in his time. It was afterwards believed that needing knowledge, but being proud and trusting in his own strength of will, he dared to look in the Palantir of the White Tower. In the films, this madness is not much explained, but this loss and his use of the Palantir of Minas Tirith and fighting with the will of Sauron had a huge impact on his mind, and not a positive one. The unexpected loss of Boromir later did the rest. It's impressive, though, that Denethor did never fall under Sauron's will, and could resist and even learn things from this, but in the end, all what happened was too much and drove him into deep despair. In Unfinished Tales and Appendix A, we can also read about how Denethor's father, Ecthelion II, respected the famous Thorongil, so Aragorn, and also Gandalf. We can even read how Thorongil advised the steward of trusting Gandalf, but not Saruman, which indicates that they were at least suspicious of the White Wizard's activities. From the perspective of the steward's son, the success of those diminished his own position in Gondor. As a result, Denethor was jealous of Thorongil and suspicious of Gandalf, which drove him towards the idea of surpassing the stranger and the wizard in knowledge and information, which he could only accomplish by using the Palantir. The steward had good intentions for Gondor and his people, but his pride and all these later events pushed him into the wrong direction, and instead of supporting these powerful allies, he saw rivals in them, which ultimately led to his own downfall. Also, 3rd Age 2978, when Boromir was born, Théoden's son Theodred was born as well, but his mother Elfhild did not survive giving birth. I never noticed this before, but in this context the story of Théoden and Denethor II are very similar. Both lost their wife early, and later, tragically, their sons died early as well. Théoden, though, could be saved, while Denethor drifted into madness or despair. Then, 3rd Age 2982, Merry was born. According to the Unfinished Tales chapter The Palantiri, note 7, around 3rd Age 2990, Saruman already began creating his orc armies. In the films this happens much more in parallel, but in the books he has 29 years to prepare his armies. In the same year, Pippin is born. As said earlier, I skipped some important events in 3rd Age 2980, which was a special year and in many ways tragic. Also tons of things happened that year. So we jump back 10 years, 2 years after Boromir is born. In Rohan, King Thorongil died and his son Théoden becomes king. In the Shire, Samwise Gamgee is born, but tragically Frodo's parents drown in the Brandywine due to a boat accident when he was around 12 years old. In that time, Steward Ecthelion II had great trust in Thorongil. Some might have speculated that Thorongil left before Denethor could succeed his father, which would have caused rivalry. Thorongil warned the steward that the Corsairs of Umbar could cause great problems when Mordor would attack Gondor. 3rd Age 2980, Thorongil was allowed to gather a small fleet of ships. He used that fleet and attacked Umbar by night, burning many ships of the enemy, even killing the captain of the haven in battle himself, and then retreating with few losses. After that, he wrote Ecthelion a letter and did not return to Minas Tirith, where great honor awaited him. With this huge success, he left Gondor and ended his service and his great journeys as Thorongil. It seems he went to the confines of Mordor after that, at least for a while. Then I assume he explored the far south and east, quote, "He rode in the host of the Rohirrim and fought for the Lord of Gondor by land and by sea, and then, in the hour of victory, he passed out of the knowledge of men of the west, and went alone far into the east and deep into the south, exploring the hearts of men, both evil and good, and uncovering the plots and devices of the servants of Sauron." In the same year, he wanted to return to Rivendell and came close to Lothlórien. Galadriel allowed him to enter her land. She bade him cast aside his way-worn raiment, and she clothed him in silver and white, with a cloak of elven grey and a bright gem on his brow. And he appeared more than a king of men. He seemed like an elf lord with his stature and in this garment. It's interesting how Aragorn's identity switches and develops so much. He started as Estel, not knowing his true identity or who his father was. Then, when he finally learned his real name and importance with 20 years, he leaves his home and goes into the wild, later meeting Gandalf. Then he took again another fake identity as Thorongil, serving in the armies of Rohan and Gondor for 23 years, basically networking and helping men to stand strong against Sauron's forces and plans. And then, with 49, he cast aside the identity of Thorongil and becomes again Aragorn, being clad in a way that shows who he could become in the future. And as we know, he will be known as Strider in the Norse afterwards for quite some time. to finally become King Elessar in the end. However, by chance or purpose, Arwen Undomiel was also in Lothlorien, visiting again her mother's kin. Tolkien implies that her last meeting with Aragorn and the resulting conflict with the ways of her people, including the immortality and her as half-elven having to choose between mortality and immortality, had an impact on her. Quote, "Yet her face was more grave, and her laughter now seldom was heard." But when they met again, she made her choice, quote, "And as he, Aragorn, came walking towards her under the trees of Caras Galadhon, laden with flowers of gold, her choice was made and her doom appointed." On the fair hill Cerin Amros, Aragorn gave the ring of Barahir to Arwen, and they plighted their troth. Elrond once said to Aragorn, when he revealed his true name to him, "You shall neither have wife nor bind any woman to you in troth, until your time comes and you are found worthy of it." Now his time has come, and he has been found worthy of it, else Galadriel would not have let him enter her realm and clad him like an elf lord. In the high trees of this hill Amros, king of Lothlorien, once lived. The hill was piled by the labor of many hands and served to watch Dol Guldur over the Anduin. In the text we can also read how they looked east to the shadow and west to the twilight. East was Dol Guldur, southeast was Mordor, while in the west over the ocean were the Undying Lands. When Elrond learned of his daughter's choice, he was silent. Tolkien puts it very nicely into words. He was silent, though his heart was grieved, and found the doom long feared none the easier to endure. He knew that it might happen for a long time to prepare himself for this moment, but it still hit him hard. He had to give so many things in his life, and now one of his most dearest beings in his life. Also about Arwen we can read, she loved her father dearly. Aragorn had to continue his journey and went to Rivendell, where Elrond obviously wanted to talk to him. Elrond was for sure sad, but of course accepted the will of his daughter. He also loved Aragorn like a son, though knowing, quote, "a shadow lies between us." His first words to Aragorn are, "my son." This scene I always interpret as Elrond definitely wanting to make his loss count, and it making the difference at the end, quote, "Maybe it has been appointed so, that by my loss the kingship of men may be restored." And in a way he connects his permission for Aragorn to marry Arwen to him becoming the king of Gondor and Arnor, quote, "Arwen Undomiel shall not diminish her life's grace for less cause. She shall not be the bride of any man less than the king of both Gondor and Arnor." In Tolkien's universe, oaths cannot be taken lightly, especially by someone like Aragorn. He is betrothed to Arwen and gave her one of his most valuable heirlooms, the ring of Barahir, as ring. He is all in. With this, he can and will only marry Arwen, and he can only do this by becoming the king of Gondor and Arnor. If he fails, the line of Elendil will end here, and to become truly king, Sauron must be defeated somehow, else Aragorn might die. Sauron wins and Middle-earth is doomed anyway. A complicated doom, an impossible task, distantly reminiscent of Beren and Luthien again, and even Aragorn said to Arwen, "I cannot foresee it, and how it may come to pass is hidden from me, yet with your hope I will hope." His old name Estel also means hope. As said, this in many ways reflects parts of the story of Beren and Luthien. It is so tragic for Elrond because he will not see his daughter again, maybe when the world is made anew, but that the elves don't know for sure. He even foresees that when Aragorn might die one day of old age, the doom of men may seem hard at the ending for Arwen. However, to succeed in this impossible task, Aragorn has to become the absolute best man possible. and that is why he worked day and night on the downfall of Sauron and his allies since he left Rivendell. And this was also the first thing he did when he left Rivendell again. And while he was working against Sauron, who gathered more and more strength, Arwen accompanied him always in her thoughts. Only few things have now to happen for the War of the Ring to break out. Gollum has to move and be found to start the hunt for the ring, which is the last step in this prelude to the Lord of the Rings, but that we will discuss in the next video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and that I could give some insights that people might not have been aware of. If so, press the like button, subscribe and leave a comment, especially if you have further questions or hints. It was a ton of work to make. Sorry that this part took me so long to make. I really needed to work on some other projects, for example my German Twitch channel, and YouTube and the performance of videos you put tons of work into is at times very frustrating. But I'm eager now to complete the Who is Elrond project and make a 12-hour all-in-one version out of it once everything is completed, and I hope the video does well on YouTube. If you are into gaming and really want to support me further, I need like 70 subscribers on my English Games channel to hit the 1000 subscribers. Would help a ton to reach that. Also, huge thank you to all people supporting me in all the different ways, be it over membership subscriptions on Twitch, but also just watching my videos, pressing the like button, recommending me further, being active in the community, and so on. Thank you so much for it. See you people next time. Goodbye.